Do you feel underappreciated, undervalued, and overlooked? Well, if that's the case, now you know how the 1932 Ford Model B feels. Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution here once again at the Martin Auto Museum. A wonderful collection of more than 170 cars that really span the full automotive spectrum. We've got some really early stuff, got some modern machinery, we've got racy stuff, luxury, just about something for everybody. And this particular car, this 1932 Ford Model B, is what I'll call a very overlooked chapter in the automotive evolution. But before we talk about this car, make sure you like and subscribe down below. And of course, in the comments, let me know what I got right and most importantly, what I got wrong. There's always something I got wrong. Or if you have a story about a 32 Deuce Coupe, whether it's original like this one or a hot rod, we want to hear from you. But before we talk too much about this particular car, this 1932 Ford Model B, we have to point out that this isn't the original Model B. That happened decades earlier. The original Ford was the Model A, not the one you remember, but the one that was very small and affordable, only used a two-cylinder engine mounted under the seat. It was really Ford's first production car and aimed at getting the company off the ground. In contrast, the Model B, which came out in 1904, was much larger and more refined. It had a front-mounted four-cylinder engine producing 24 horsepower. And of course, that was going to be the norm for Ford going forward, front-mounted four-cylinder engines. The Model B also introduced a longer wheelbase and a more formal touring car style for the body. But it was priced at $2,000, which meant the Model B was a high-end option. It was not a replacement for the Model A in the traditional sense, but rather it initially was an expansion of Ford's lineup, exploring different market segments. Though it sold in small numbers, the Model B did give Ford valuable experience in building the more complex vehicles and really helped to shape the company's future direction. All right, now let's move forward. We all know that the Model T was a huge success, right? Starting in 1908, going all the way to 1927, massive numbers sold around the world. Model A, a big follow-up from 1928 all the way through 1931. But for 1932, Ford realizes they needed to make some big changes. Other car companies, well, they were doing interesting things from a styling perspective, performance perspective, that Ford, well, not just needed to follow, but needed to get ahead of. So in 1932, they took a big swing. They came out with the V8. That's right, a V8 engine, that classic flathead V8 engine that we know today. And they decided to put it in an all-new car as well. This may look a lot like the Model A, but in reality, it's very different. New chassis, a lot of new body components. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But they were still concerned that maybe everybody might not be ready for that V8 engine. Remember, it was just after the Depression. The V8 engine was going to cost about $50 more per car than what people were going to spend for a smaller four-cylinder engine. So what they decided to do was keep the Model B, a four-cylinder version of that Model 18. Yes, it had the same body, had all the same components, except it had a four-cylinder engine underneath instead of the V8. Let's take a walk around, get a closer look at our 1932 Ford Model B and talk about the changes between the Model A and the Model B. And we can start right up front with this radiator. If you look at the radiator on a Model A, you'll notice first off, it's not painted. Second, it is sharper edge. Come back to the Model B, notice that it's rounder now with this Ford emblem and this little chrome touch, the bright metal that is accentuating the shape of the radiator. Of course, it would change even more significantly in 1933, but this was the beginning of having a styled radiator with this kind of V shape at the front. If you were to see a Model B drive by, to be honest with you, back in those days, you probably wouldn't notice or appreciate all the changes that had gone into it. Had a completely different chassis underneath, completely different than what they ran in 1931. Another style change that I need to point out is this A-pillar right here. If you look at the A-pillar of a Model A Ford, you'll notice that it's straight up and down. Come back to the Model B, now what we're beginning to see is a little bit of an angle to it, just a slight cant to it like this. It gives it a little more aerodynamic, if you want to call it that, but more important, a little more stylized look. So they're beginning to focus on the little subtle changes that can make the car look better. This cowl is very different than the Model A. If you look at a Model A, well, it has a fuel tank, a fuel filler right in the center. Come back to the Model B, and now that fuel filler is gone, and this is a vent. You control it from inside, you can pop it up, allows you to get fresh air into the car, so that's a huge difference. So where have they put the gas tank? Well, now they've moved it to the rear of the car. Here's the filler right here, and as would be done with most modern cars for a long time, that is exactly where the fuel tank would sit. Now, to be honest with you, it's probably not the safest place. If you're going to get in a rear-end collision, there were going to be problems. But in terms of the way cars were designed for an awful long time, sitting underneath the trunk, that was the standard place to have the fuel tank. This, of course, is a coupe. We call this a 5-window coupe because it has 5 windows in addition to the front window. We'll go inside in just a moment. Another little subtle change, if you look at a Model A, you'll notice that around the louvers of the hood, there's actually a raised stamp area. Come back to the Model B, well, you'll notice that's gone. Now it's just the louvers. So there are a lot of subtle changes, but most importantly, it's all the changes underneath that you can't see, from the chassis to the suspension. All this work that was done to change this car. And while this was only a 1-year car, a lot of those changes would continue on through the following years. So the Model B and, importantly, the Model 18 that had the V8 were really significant cars in terms of moving forward with the Ford automotive design. I want you to imagine for just a moment that you have a fraternal twin, a brother or a sister that everybody thinks is spectacular, head cheerleader, captain of the football team, big man on campus, whatever it may be, and you're kind of stuck in the shadow. Welcome to the Model B. That's exactly the problem with this car right here. The fraternal twin who was cool was the Model 18. That was the V8 engine that was introduced in 1932. By the way, 1.8 stands for first V8 engine, but they just called it the Model 18. But, Ford was trying to hedge its bets. They were thinking, well, what if everybody doesn't want a new V8? What if they want that tried and true 4-cylinder? That's what the Model B existed for. You had the Model 18 for those who wanted to try something new, or you had this 4-cylinder. And the reality is most people decided they really liked that V8 and it had a lot more attention and frankly got a lot more sales. This engine is the evolution of an engine that had been around in Ford for a long time. It was basically the same engine that had been in the Model T. It was definitely almost the same engine that had been in the Model A. But when it got to the Model B, there were definitely some improvements that they had put into this engine. It had a better crankshaft, had a mechanical fuel pump, a simple updraft carburetor right there, the same 201 cubic inches that you had seen in the Model A. But now, with those improvements, it was now pumping out 50 horsepower compared to the 40 horsepower that you were getting out of the Model A version. So the Model B was definitely an improvement in just about every way. And normally, if you could get 10 horsepower more, think about that, 25% more than what you were getting in the previous year, that would be something you would really talk about. But because of the new V8 engine, the Model 18, well, the reality is that the Ford Model B and its 4-cylinder were very underappreciated, undervalued, and folks just didn't talk about it as much. The buzz was all about the V8. If you bought the V8, there were 14 different models to choose from. But I believe if you bought the Model B 4-cylinder, well, you were limited to just 4 different body styles. Yep, little brother got the short end of the straw again. Let's take a look inside our 1932 Ford Model B. You have to kind of work at it to climb inside. Similar in a lot of ways to the Model A, but also different at the same time. And we'll start with the fact the seat itself was lower. The car itself was overall lower. They wanted to give the concept of having a lower riding car, which obviously was going to be a better performing car. The most significant difference when you would get into the car from a Model B compared to a Model A was going to be the dashboard. The Model A dashboard was actually inset. It was under the dash just a little bit. Had a little more stylized elements to it. For the 1932 Ford, they decided to go with a much simpler concept, just this oval section in the center, which had a speedometer. It's got an ammeter. It also has a fuel gauge. So a lot different in terms of the way they were going for the dashboard styling. One of the significant things that happened was as I mentioned as I was walking around, they added a vent that went on the cowl. The handle down here under the hood is actually how you opened it. You would reach down, push it, and that would pop that open. You'd pull it, and that would close it. The significant was, for the first time, you had the ability in a Ford to get the air passing through the cabin without having to pop open the windshield and get that ventilation coming back that way. You could always roll the side windows down. But, on a hot day, if you wanted air coming in, getting forced in, well, you would do that. Now, Let's think about it. If it wasn't a really hot day, but you want a little bit of air, but you also didn't want all that road noise, that would actually give you a little bit of ability to have air coming through. Of course, kind of stagnated once it got in here. They didn't understand the concept of the air flowing through. You'd still probably have to crank the windows down just a little bit. But it was really the beginning of changes for Ford Motor Company in particular, because they were beginning to go after the appeal of what the driver wanted in the inside of a car. You got to remember, for an awful long time, Henry Ford was a big fan of, it's not what people want, it's what I think they need. And so now Ford was beginning to look at it from a different perspective. What is it that people wanted? The other car companies were beginning to come out with cars that, well, frankly, had more style, had more creature comforts, and Ford was being forced to follow in that same vein. Now, I should point out that, see this bar right here? If you got the 4-cylinder, that's exactly what it looked like. If you've opted for the V8 car, well, you would get a little V8 emblem that would stand on top of that. Now, here at the museum, we actually have two 32 Fords to compare and contrast. We have this one right here, the Ford Model B, the 4-cylinder model. And right behind it, we have what an awful lot of those 32 Fords turned into, a Deuce Coupe, a hot rod. This particular one has a 350 cubic inch engine under the hood. That flathead Ford is long gone. This is exactly what a lot of hot rodders have been doing for many, many decades when they could get their hands on a Deuce Coupe. Now, this particular Deuce Coupe has a fiberglass body, so this is a replica. If this had been an original steel body that came with it, this would have meant that it was a V8, because I believe this particular body style, this 3-window top, was only offered in the V8 version. This body style, this coupe body style, you could also get in the V8, but this was the one you got only if you wanted a coupe in the Model B version. That was the only option. So let's call this the before, and let's call this the after. While it was just a one-year offering, the Model B really was not a failure. It sold in decent numbers, although not as well as the V8. But it did give Ford a way to serve customers who preferred or trusted were stuck with that 4-cylinder engine in their head. It also helped them to maintain production volume during the Great Depression, the early 30s, economic uncertainty. The legacy of the Model B lives on in several ways. First off, it really marked Ford's end of using the simple 4-cylinder cars as the foundation of their cars. It also helped early hot rodders, because a Model B chassis was probably cheaper to buy than a V8 model of the same thing, and they could build and make their own hot rods. Today, I think people who remember the Model B, and I don't think there's very many of them, but those who do remember the Model B are probably going to think of this as a transitional car. Transitional in just about every way. Hanging on to that 4-cylinder engine just a little bit longer. Transitional styling between the Model A and the 1933 Ford, which is starting to get more style into it. Transitioning from the old concept of having cars that were built for multiple years to a style that was only good for 1 year. The Model B deserves to be remembered. It's just always going to live in the shadow of that fraternal twin who's bigger, better, and badder.